Dreams can change everything. Just ask Joseph, the young Hebrew whose nights filled with visions would alter the course of nations and save countless lives. But before those dreams brought him to power, they nearly cost him everything. The morning sun spilled across the hills of Canaan as 17-year-old Joseph hurried toward his brothers in the distant pastures. His ornate coat, a magnificent garment of many colors gifted by his father Jacob, billowed behind him like a banner announcing his favored status. The coat represented everything his brothers resented: their father's obvious preference, Joseph's elevated position despite being younger, and the implied claim that he would someday rule over them all. What they didn't know was that Joseph carried inside him dreams that would fan their smoldering jealousy into a blaze of hatred. Joseph was the 11th of 12 brothers, born to Jacob in his old age. His mother Rachel had been Jacob's true love, the woman for whom he had worked 14 years. This history of favoritism flowed down through the generations like a poisoned stream. Jacob had made no secret of his special affection for Joseph, elevating him above his older brothers and presenting him with the elaborate coat that marked him as the chosen son. "I had a dream last night," Joseph announced one morning at breakfast, his eyes bright with excitement. His brothers paused their eating, exchanging glances across the campfire. Joseph continued, oblivious to their darkening expressions. "We were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Reuben, the eldest, spoke with barely controlled anger. So you think you will rule over us? You believe you will actually be our king?" The others muttered their agreement, their faces hard with resentment. Joseph's enthusiasm should have been tempered by their reaction, but the dreams kept coming. Soon after, he approached them again. "Listen to this dream I had," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." This time, even his father rebuked him. "What kind of dream is this?" Jacob demanded. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers burned with jealousy, but Jacob, despite his public scolding, privately wondered what these dreams might mean. The tension simmered until one fateful day when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were grazing the flocks near Shechem. "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and the flocks," Jacob told him, "and bring me word." Joseph set out across the valley, his colorful coat visible from a great distance. When his brothers spotted the approaching figure, their whispers turned deadly. "Look," sneered Simeon, "here comes that dreamer." Levi's eyes narrowed. "Now's our chance. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell father that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." Only Reuben, the firstborn, showed a flicker of conscience. "Let's not take his life," he urged. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben secretly planned to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. When Joseph arrived, his greeting died on his lips as his brothers seized him, stripped him of his ornate robe, and threw him into an empty cistern, a deep pit carved into the rock to collect rainwater. The walls were too steep to climb. Joseph's pleas echoed against the stone as his brothers sat down to eat their meal, unmoved by his cries. As they ate, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders approached on their way to Egypt. Judah, seeing an opportunity, suggested a different plan. "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." The brothers agreed, pulling Joseph from the pit and selling him for 20 shekels of silver. The traders bound his hands and added him to their human cargo, continuing their journey toward Egypt. Joseph watched the hills of his homeland disappear behind him, tears streaming down his face. His brothers returned home with his special coat, which they had dipped in goat's blood. "We found this," they told their father, feigning sadness. "Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized it immediately. "It is my son's robe," he cried out. "Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." The old man tore his clothes in grief, refused comfort, and declared he would mourn until he joined his son in death. Meanwhile, Joseph was sold in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. The spoiled, favored son of a wealthy nomadic herdsman now found himself a slave in a foreign land, separated from everyone and everything he had ever known. But God was with Joseph, blessing everything he did. Potiphar noticed Joseph's exceptional abilities and eventually placed him in charge of his entire household. For a time, Joseph's circumstances improved dramatically. He was no longer a field laborer but a household manager with significant responsibility. Then came another dream, not Joseph's this time, but one that would again upend his life. Potiphar's wife had taken notice of the handsome young Hebrew. "Come to bed with me," she demanded one day when they were alone in the house. Joseph refused. "My master has trusted me with everything he owns," he explained. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Day after day, she persisted. Day after day, he refused. Finally, she cornered him when no one else was around, grabbing his cloak as he fled from her presence. Humiliated by his rejection, she clutched his garment like evidence and screamed for the other servants. "This Hebrew slave tried to attack me," she claimed, first to the household staff and then to her husband when he returned. For the second time, a garment would be used to falsely accuse Joseph. Potiphar, enraged, had Joseph thrown into the king's prison. Once again, Joseph's world collapsed around him. From favored son to slave, and now from trusted household manager to despised prisoner, his life seemed to spiral ever downward. In the dank darkness of Pharaoh's prison, other men might have surrendered to despair or bitterness. Joseph instead maintained his integrity, and God's favor followed him even there. The prison warden noticed Joseph's exceptional qualities and placed him in charge of all the prisoners. Whatever Joseph did, the Lord made it succeed. Some time later, 2 new prisoners arrived, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker. Both had offended their royal master and found themselves sharing Joseph's confinement. One night, each of these men had a troubling dream. When Joseph noticed their distress the next morning, he asked, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they said, "but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph's response revealed the source of his resilience through all his hardships. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer spoke first. "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. As soon as it budded, blossoms appeared, and clusters of ripe grapes grew on it. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes, squeezed them into his cup, and placed the cup in his hand." Joseph's interpretation came quickly. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position as his cupbearer. When this happens, please remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in this dungeon." Encouraged by this favorable interpretation, the baker shared his dream. "I had 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph's face betrayed his concern before he spoke. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, both interpretations proved accurate. The cupbearer was restored to his position, while the baker was executed. Joseph waited eagerly for word from the palace, hoping the cupbearer would remember him as promised. But the cupbearer, once restored to the comfort of the palace, forgot all about the Hebrew interpreter who had predicted his return to favor. 2 full years passed. Joseph remained in prison, perhaps wondering if God had forgotten him too. Then came the 3rd dream, not Joseph's, nor his fellow prisoners, but Pharaoh's, and with it, the dramatic reversal of Joseph's fortunes. One night, Pharaoh dreamed he was standing by the Nile River. Out of the river came 7 sleek, fat cows that grazed among the reeds. After them came 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, that stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. The ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 healthy, full heads of grain grew on a single stalk. After them, thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream, but one that troubled his spirit deeply. In the morning, Pharaoh's mind remained unsettled. He summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt and told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them. Finally, the chief cupbearer remembered his promise. "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings," he told Pharaoh. "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody, We each had a dream the same night. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. The prison guards rushed to get him ready, shaving him and providing clean clothes before hurrying him into Pharaoh's presence. After 2 years in prison, Joseph suddenly stood before the most powerful man in the known world. "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it," Pharaoh said to Joseph. "But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream you can interpret it." Joseph's response revealed both his humility and his faith. "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." After Pharaoh recounted his dreams, Joseph explained, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine." Then Joseph continued with urgency in his voice, "7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be." Not content merely to interpret the dream, Joseph offered a solution. "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh, to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." Pharaoh and all his officials recognized the wisdom in Joseph's words. "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh asked them. Then he turned to Joseph. "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." With that declaration, Joseph's life transformed once again. Pharaoh removed his signet ring and placed it on Joseph's finger, dressed him in fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. He gave him the 2nd chariot in his procession and had people shout before him, "Make way." Thus, at 30 years of age, 13 years after being sold into slavery by his brothers, Joseph became the 2nd most powerful man in Egypt. The interpretation proved accurate. 7 years of abundance came, and under Joseph's direction, Egypt stored vast quantities of grain in every city. Then the 7 years of famine began, affecting all the surrounding countries. While other nations suffered, Egypt had bread, thanks to Joseph's wise administration. People from all over the region came to Egypt to buy grain, as the famine was severe throughout the world. In Canaan, Jacob's family felt the famine's grip tighten. When the aging patriarch heard that Egypt had grain, he sent 10 of his sons to buy provisions. Only Benjamin, Joseph's full brother and now Jacob's favorite, remained at home, protected by his father's fear of losing him too. When the brothers arrived in Egypt and came before the governor to buy grain, they didn't recognize the Egyptian official as their brother Joseph. His appearance had changed. He was now 39 years old, dressed in Egyptian clothing, speaking through an interpreter. But Joseph recognized them immediately. The dreams of his youth suddenly made sense. Here were his brothers, bowing before him just as the sheaves and stars had bowed in his dreams. Joseph decided to test them, accusing them of being spies and demanding they prove their honesty by bringing their youngest brother to Egypt. He kept Simeon as a hostage and sent the others home with grain, and with the silver they had brought to pay for it, secretly returned to their sacks. When they discovered the silver, terror seized them. "What is this that God has done to us?" they asked one another, finally beginning to consider that divine judgment might be catching up with them. Back in Canaan, they reported everything to their father, including the governor's demand to see Benjamin. Jacob refused to let Benjamin go. "My son will not go down with you," he insisted. "His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." But as the famine worsened and their supplies dwindled, Jacob had no choice but to relent. The brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, prepared for the worst. To their surprise, the governor invited them to dine at his house. During the meal, Joseph was deeply moved at the sight of his brother Benjamin but maintained his disguise. As a final test, Joseph had his silver cup planted in Benjamin's sack and then sent soldiers after his brothers, accusing them of theft. When the cup was found in Benjamin's possession, the brothers tore their clothes in despair. Back at the palace, Judah, who had first suggested selling Joseph years before, now offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place, explaining that their father would die of grief if Benjamin didn't return. Judah's sacrificial offer proved that the brothers had changed. Joseph could contain himself no longer. He ordered all his attendants out, and then, with tears streaming down his face, revealed his true identity. "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" His brothers stood stunned, terrified by the implications. The brother they had sold into slavery now held absolute power over their lives. "Come close to me," Joseph said. "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." In that moment of revelation, Joseph demonstrated the profound spiritual understanding he had gained through his suffering. He recognized that God's hand had been guiding his life through every bitter circumstance, working toward a purpose far greater than anyone could have imagined. The dreams that had once incited his brother's hatred had been divine foretellings of a plan to save many lives. The brothers returned to Canaan with the joyous news that Joseph was alive and now ruler of Egypt. Jacob could hardly believe it until he saw the Egyptian wagons Joseph had sent to transport the entire family to Egypt, where they would be provided for during the remaining 5 years of famine. As the family caravan approached Egypt, Joseph went out in his chariot to meet his father. When he saw him, he threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." The dreams that had seemed like youthful fantasies had been fulfilled in ways no one could have predicted. The teenage boy who had once innocently shared his dreams of prominence now understood their deeper meaning. God had sent him ahead to preserve life during a devastating famine. What his brothers had intended for harm, God had used for good. Years later, after Jacob died, the brothers feared Joseph might finally take revenge. They sent him a message claiming their father had requested before his death that Joseph forgive them. Whether the message was true or fabricated from fear, Joseph's response revealed the depth of his spiritual maturity. "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The 3 pivotal dreams, Joseph's visions of sheaves and stars, Pharaoh's dream of cows and grain, had altered the course of history. Through them, God had positioned Joseph to save not only his family but countless others from starvation. The dreamer had become the deliverer, transforming the private revelation of night visions into the public salvation of nations. In Joseph's story, we find profound insights about providence and purpose. His journey from favored son to slave to prisoner to ruler reveals how God works through human circumstances, even painful ones, to accomplish divine purposes. The dreams that first appeared as youthful fantasies proved to be glimpses of a future that required years of suffering and growth to prepare Joseph for his role. Joseph's declaration to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good," stands as one of the most powerful statements in Scripture about God's ability to redeem human evil for divine purposes. Joseph's life demonstrates that God's plans unfold across decades, often through circumstances we cannot understand in the moment. The young dreamer who once wore a coat of many colors became a man who could look beyond personal offense to see God's greater design. Through his faithfulness in adversity, Joseph saved not only his family but the embryonic nation that would eventually bring forth the Messiah. 3 dreams changed everything, not just for Joseph and his family, but for the redemptive story of all humanity.